Hi, I'm Tony from Driver Hire Croydon and Sutton.
Hello, I'm Gary from Driver Hire in Colchester.
Today we're going out for another drive in Doris, this time to learn about pedestrian crossings.
Now I know there's a lot of different pedestrian crossings, but I don't always understand what the differences are, so hopefully you'll enlighten me, Tony.
Well, I can certainly try.
But good. The other thing I'm worried about, it's autumn, there's no roof, in fact there's not much in this car to be honest, Tony. I've come prepared with a nice woolly hat, but I can see you haven't, and I bought you a gift.
Oh, that's very kind of you, Gary. Thank you very much indeed.
That's all right, that'll keep your ears warm. So, Tony, we're sitting in Doris and the roof's off, the sun is out, the woolly hats are on because it's a little bit fresh.
Yes.
And what are we doing today?
Well, today, Gary, I am going to take you to see puffins, pelicans, zebras and toucans.
We're going to London Zoo?
Well, I will take you to the zoo, Gary, but not today.
Oh.
Today, we are going to have a look at some pedestrian crossings.
Well, I know a zebra crossing and a pelican crossing, and I've heard the other two, but I don't really know what the real differences are in reality.
Okay, well, hopefully we'll learn something.
Oh, good. Yeah. So, Tony, we're now coming into Epsom Downs. Wow, what a view!
Yeah, Epsom Downs, the home of the Derby. And I have to say, Gary, I was lucky enough to grow up round here. So the house I grew up in is actually just half a mile from here. So this was kind of my back garden when I was a kid.
Well, that's a hell of a back garden you've got, Tony.
Lovely, isn't it?
It is.
And this bend on the racecourse here, this is Tatman Corner. And Tatman Corner is extremely famous for when the suffragette movement, Emily Davison threw herself in front of the King's horse.
Yes.
And unfortunately died. I don't know whether she intended to kill herself, but created a huge amount of publicity for the suffragette cause.
So what's the first crossing we've got to see today, Tony?
Well, how's your Greek mythology?
Poor?
So, in Greek mythology there was a flying horse called Pegasus, and there's a type of crossing called a Pegasus crossing. But
the only Pegasus crossing I know is in France, and that's where the parachute regiment came down in the Second World War.
Okay.
We're not in France, are we?
No, we're not. So Pegasus, otherwise known as an equestrian crossing.
All right.
And this is the one in front of us now.
I live near Newmarket, and I'm assuming there's some of these around there as well, but I've never heard of a Pegasus, so it's something new to me totally.
Well, I suppose from a motorist point of view, and it's interesting you say that, from a motorist point of view, what you see in terms of the light phases are exactly the same, whether it's a Puffin Crossing, a toucan crossing, or a Pegasus crossing, because they all use the same light phase, which is the same as traffic lights. So you'll see the amber telling you to stop if it's safe to do so, followed by the red, and then you'll get red and amber together, which is telling you to get ready to move off, and then go to green. And what's happening with the crossing is there's all sorts of sensors checking to see if there's still people, or in this case horses, or potentially whatever other road users using the crossing. If there's still people on the crossing, then it's not going to change back to red and amber and then followed by green. It'll wait until the crossing's clear.
Oh, so it's a clever crossing. It's not like a zebra crossing, just where you're walking across. This one can suss out there's people on there through sensors, I'll guess, in the road.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So very much like the Puffin, what the Pegasus or equestrian crossing has is these sensors looking down at the crossing, but also at the traffic. And so when the button's pressed, what will happen is the crossing will decide, based on its sensors, when it is the best time for it to go red. So in other words, if there was a car coming straight up to the crossing, then it may delay turning red to the motorist, letting that car go through, letting the traffic flow. But similarly, if a pedestrian pressed that button, but then chose not to cross and walked away from the crossing, it would sense the pedestrian's not there anymore, and then it would take it out of that getting ready to go red to the car phase.
Ah, that's really clever.
So the big difference with the equestrian crossing is the button, because of course, first of all, you've got a horse rider up on a horse, And if the button's down low, then you'd have a situation where the horse rider would have to get off the horse to press the button. And believe it or not, horses can't press the buttons themselves.
They can't reach with a hoof.
No. So the button is mounted much higher up, so the horse rider can press it. But as we can see, the button is far short of the crossing. In this case, it's some 25, 30 yards short of the crossing. So the crossing's then got time to work out when it's safe to turn green to the horse and red to the car for the horse to come safely across.
And I'm assuming it's so the horses don't have to stand about so long waiting for the traffic to stop, because horses are much easier to startle than cars or human beings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, the other thing to notice with the equestrian crossing is the control box is on the right-hand side, because, of course, a pedestrian could use the equestrian crossing.
Yep. Why are they always on the right-hand side?
Well, interesting point. If you think about it, if you're standing there with the control box on the right, as you turn to the right to press the button, you're actually looking in the direction of the traffic that's coming towards you, the one that would run you over first if you stepped into the road.
So you can look at the traffic naturally, not to cross, but it's a safety mechanism.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing about this type of crossing, these kind of intelligent crossings, is the control box itself. In this case, it's a picture of a horse, but that picture, whether it's red or green to stay or go, is on your side of the road, and you don't get the image on the traffic lights high up on the other side of the road.
So another crossing, like the typical Pelican Crossing, has it opposite you as you look across at the traffic lights.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And some people find that a little disconcerting, because if they're used to seeing that image on the other side of the road, I'll say some people, I'm talking about pedestrians, crossing that crossing, they can see it's green on the other side, and they know they're still safe. They can see if it's green for them, it must be red for the cars, feel comfortable. Perhaps what they don't understand is that if they're on the crossing, there's a sensor that can see them, and so therefore the very fact they're on the crossing means it's not going to go green for the cars while they're on it.
So they can feel safe crossing either slowly and not have to worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. So it is the case that we've chosen to film a video on a crisp, cold autumn day in an open-top car.
Yeah, and we're going for how many miles, Tony, in this freezing cold car?
Well, you say that, but the good news is that I specified the optional extra on a Caterham 7, which is the heater.
Oh, hang on, a heater's an optional extra?
The heater's an optional extra.
What, because all the extra 2 kilos of the weight into the system would slow it up?
Well, what it is, a lot of people that buy Caterham 7s use them for track days and academy racing and stuff, and weight is absolutely everything.
Right.
So you don't necessarily want a heater if you're doing that kind of thing. Now, this is obviously much more of a road spec car, and whilst you would get cold ears without a driver hire hat on, you're not going to get cold feet because the heater will get roasting soon.
I can feel the heat on my legs, which is a benefit, so that's good.
So as we come into the village here, Gary, you can see there's another zebra crossing, but this time it's a staggered zebra crossing. And what you've got is 2 crossings separated by a pedestrian island. And what we do here is we treat it as 2 separate crossings.
Yep, so if there's a pedestrian coming across from the right, we don't have to stop in the left-hand lane.
Correct. So this is a zebra crossing.
Now, Tony, these are the crossings I grew up with. In fact, I do know a fact about the zebra crossing.
Go on then, go on.
First introduced in Slough in 1951.
Wow. Okay, so that's from personal experience, is it?
Blimey, Tony, I'm not that old. Come on.
So zebra crossings then, I suppose the first thing to know about zebra crossing is it's the only pedestrian crossing where the pedestrian always has right of way.
So as soon as I set my foot onto the road, all traffic should stop to let me cross both ways.
Well, you're right, but actually we can now go one stage further than that because the highway code has just changed, and it is the situation now that the motorist needs to give way to the pedestrian when they're looking to cross, not just when they're actually on the crossing, which is what the highway code used to say. So yes, certainly when you're on it, but also when you're looking to cross, the motorist should be giving way to you.
I'm going to use the word body language, but it's not necessarily the whole body. You can see as they're walking across, you can see they're angling themselves to come across. And are they really concentrating? Have they got the headphones in and things like that? Because we know a lot of people walk with music on and everything else today.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But I suppose the thing to think about is that the vast majority of viewers of our videos and listeners to our podcasts are drivers of heavier vehicles of one type or another. And that being the case, it's always been the case that they've needed to anticipate in this situation. So I don't really think, even though the highway code has changed, there's going to be a massive difference in the way the professional driver approaches a zebra crossing. But yeah, absolutely, it is the case that the pedestrian has priority looking to cross, not just on the crossing now. So, other things to look out for on the zebra crossing. The first and most obvious thing is the Belisha beacon. So this is this yellow amber flashing light sitting on top of a black and white stripy post. That Belisha beacon flashes continuously. Sometimes you'll see them shielded so the light doesn't spill sideways, particularly in residential areas, and just shines towards the motorist. But yeah, so unique crossings. Okay, now the next one we're coming up to is a Puffin Crossing, and this is the newer version of the pedestrian crossing, and this is the pedestrian user-friendly crossing.
Well, how does that work then, Tony? Is it an intelligent one?
Well, not as intelligent as you, Gary, but it's a pretty intelligent crossing.
I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you, Tony.
So really, the Puffin Crossing is an upgrade on the old Pelican Crossing, and not exclusively, but most modern crossing installations will be a Puffin. There are some reasons why you might still have a Pelican, which is why drivers need to understand the difference between the two. But the Puffin is so called because the name is taken from pedestrian user friendly, PUF.
Didn't know that.
So what's user friendly about it is that it has a whole bunch of sensors that check various different things.
And they're like cameras sitting on top of the lights themselves, looking down at the road for traffic in both directions and also on the pedestrian.
In the distance, if you just see a green light, you don't know whether it's a Pelican or a Puffin. If it's a Puffin, it's very likely that the crossing will sense you coming and therefore won't go red on you just because the pedestrians press the button. But you can't tell from a distance necessarily that that's the case. So you would wish to anticipate what's coming.
I mean, I've got decent eyesight, and as we were driving up to this, I didn't know all the cameras on the top, what they really meant. And I guess a lot of people don't. And that's why we're doing this today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I noticed we've got zigzags on this one as well, Tony.
Yeah, so zigzags can be on any type of crossing, but they do mean a specific couple of things. So the first thing is do not park within the zigzags. Now, if you're caught doing that, that's 3 points on your licence, so you definitely don't want to be doing that. But more importantly, and the reason why you get points for it, is because it's a very unsafe place to park, because you'll be obscuring the view of other people, other motorists of that crossing.
And they can vary in length, because the picture I'm looking at here, Tony, the zigzag goes quite a way into the distance and it's got a bus stop, and I guess they've adapted the zigzag to suit that particular road.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing to note is that you should never overtake within the boundaries of a zigzag, and also, even if the zigzags weren't there, you should never overtake on approach to a crossing.
Yeah. Even a cyclist.
Absolutely. Okay, now, on the control box on this Puffin Crossing, a couple of things to point out. So firstly, that control box is on our side of the road to our right. So as we're looking at the control box, we're also looking at the oncoming traffic. And on a Puffin Crossing, you won't get the green and red man on the opposite side of the road up on the traffic lights, which is disconcerting to people who are sort of halfway across the crossing, not really knowing if it's still green to them or not.
I also noticed the pavement where the crossing is has lots of little bobbles on them.
Yeah, exactly. So this is for people who are visually impaired or indeed blind, where walking along they can feel those bumps. They know that they're at a crossing, and interestingly, we looked at the spinny things as well. Now the spinny thing has got a name in the highway code, and I can't remember. It's tactile something, but I like the name spinny thing. It's far more fun. And this is a little thing underneath the control box. It's about the size of a toothpaste tube cap, about the same shape, maybe slightly bigger than a toothpaste tube cap. But when the lights are green to the pedestrian, that toothpaste tube cap thing spins. So a blind or partially sighted person can press the button, then feel underneath, and when the spinny thing starts spinning, they know the lights are green for them.
So they don't have to worry and think, oh, I need someone here to tell me it's gone green. I can physically feel it. Know it's safe to cross. They know they can, if they go slightly askew, that's not a problem because they've got the time to get across because of the sensors above them.
Yep.
Allow that.
Yeah, exactly.
Used to driving heavier vehicles, and you haven't got the same braking distance you might have in a car. You get used to having to read the road a little bit earlier. I always think it's a bit like Teddy Sheringham, and when he was playing late into his 30s, he wasn't as quick as anybody else, but he could read the game faster. And I guess for anybody watching this who understands what I'm talking about, maybe the analogy will make sense.
You could still play a decent standard of football even though he couldn't do 0 to 20 miles an hour anymore.
Yes.
And he turned like a battleship, but he could place a ball anywhere and he could read what the defenders were doing and they mark them or whatever.
Well, they used to say of him that he knew what other people were going to do before they knew what they were going to do.
That's a footballing brain for you.
So what we're doing now, Gary, we're coming into Colchester town, and there's a crossing under the bridge just as we come in, which is a toucan crossing.
Toucan?
Toucan.
Tony, why is it called a toucan?
Well, it's not quite as fancy in the acronyms like the Puffin and Pelican, but toucan, simply two can go. So two types of road user, in this case pedestrians and cyclists. In fact, if you look at the pathway coming to this crossing from the right hand side, you can see that blue order sign. So a blue circle is a you must order, and what that means is that pedestrians and cyclists must both share that particular pathway leading up to this crossing, which is a toucan crossing, so the two types of road user can both use it.
Right. I notice the green or red man are opposite you on this one.
Yeah, exactly, and you can see when it goes green that you get the extra green bicycle as well as the man.
Oh yes, I can see that now. And also, I noticed the little knobbly bits on the floor, like on other crossings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You call her Doris, and she's got a term for you or a meaning. Why Doris?
Well, funny enough, my daughter has named every single car that we've had. She comes up with names based on the number plate. So my other car has got LOU in the registration, so she calls it Lou,
right?
Obviously. And I told her that she had to name this car, but of course when you're building it, it's not road registered, and you haven't got a registration at that point. So I just said it's just some temporary name, I'm just going to call her Doris. But then when the registration came through, she said I can't change the name now, it's stuck, it's Doris. So Doris, the temporary name, has become Doris, the permanent name.
Yeah. Okay, Tony, we'll come up to another crossing, I believe, just up ahead. Tell us which crossing this one is.
So this one will be a Pelican, which is pedestrian electronically controlled. So this is the older style push-button pedestrian crossing.
What's special about a Pelican crossing compared to some others we've looked at?
Well, I think it's the other way around. So a Pelican is probably less special than the others. So Pelican stands for pedestrian electronically controlled. That's where the P, elec, bit comes from. And it's the old-fashioned type of pedestrian controlled crossing, and they don't have anything really particularly sophisticated about them, other than you press a button and it starts a traffic light phase. So the lights will stay green to the motorists until the pedestrian press the button. Now, the time between the pedestrian pressing the button and the lights changing to the motorist vary from crossing to crossing. Some can be instant, some can take a few seconds. But what then happens is you get the solid amber, which is telling the motorist to stop if it's safe to do so. And then it will go to red for the motorist. And at that point, the pedestrian standing at the side will see a green man light up on the opposite side of the road, telling them it's safe to go across. And that will stay red to the motorist and green to the pedestrian for about 10 seconds. They do vary slightly, but it's about 10 seconds. And then it changes to flashing amber to the motorist, flashing green to the pedestrian. And at that point, the motorist must give way to anybody still on the crossing, but new pedestrians coming up to it shouldn't cross. But once the crossing is clear, the motorist can go.
Yeah. So if you've got a flashing amber for the pedestrian, get a wiggle on.
Well, the pedestrian won't see the flashing amber, they'll see the flashing green man.
Ah, sorry.
Yeah, but the motorist will see the flashing amber, which effectively still means stop if there's somebody on the crossing.
Yeah.
But they're quite unsophisticated crossings, and they are in use all over the country. Generally speaking, if they got replaced or upgraded, they'd get changed to puffins. Not always, because there might be circumstances in which the local council would prefer that type of crossing. But yeah, that flashing amber is unique to this type of crossing. So from the motorist point of view, even if you didn't spot the sensors or the control boxes or the pedestrian lights or whatever, the fact that on a Pelican crossing, after the red light you get a flashing amber, that is what's telling you it's a Pelican crossing, as opposed to a puffin, which would give you the red and amber, same as the traffic lights.
I notice when I do go through different cities and so on, some crossings aren't audible anymore, but most old-fashioned Pelican crossings still have the audible beep, beep, beep to cross.
Yeah. I have to say, I think it's must be really, really tricky if you are visually impaired, because not all crossings beep, which is why obviously we talked about the spinny things underneath. But the reason why some crossings might not beep is there might be a residential area, and the last thing you want to do is keep people up all night with crossings beeping. But the other thing that's important to understand is if in say a busy town centre or city centre you had several crossings all very close together, you might have a situation where if one of them started beeping, you could have a visually impaired person on a different crossing thinking it's their crossing that's beeping, and they could walk out in front of a car.
Yeah, especially on a two-lane one.
Yeah.
I can understand that. That's very confusing.
Yeah.
And now I understand why that is.
Yeah, so the beeps often accompany the green man, but it's not an exact science for that reason.
That really makes sense. Again, they tend to have zigzag lines where you can't park or overtake. And also the knobbly bits are on the road, again, so...
On the pavement, yeah.
Sorry, thank you, Tony. So as you approach, and if you were impaired with vision, you've got an idea, you know, come to a crossing if you need it or not.
Exactly.
Well, Tony, I'm glad I've got that woolly hat on, keep my ears warm. As you can see, we're all kitted up in the driver hire uniform. I've actually got driver hire gloves with me, and I've got my driver hire socks on.
Well, I too have my driver hire socks on.
Yeah, good. And Jan from Recognition the Express should really be sponsoring us.
Is that a blatant plug, Gary? Gary, thanks so much for coming out again with me and Doris. A thoroughly enjoyable afternoon.
Well, I've got to thank you for various things. One, that we've stopped now so I can warm up. Two, I didn't realise how beautiful it was around here, and hopefully you've seen that on the videos as we've been going round. But more importantly, I've definitely learned something about the different crossings. I knew there were different ones, but I didn't know how they operated. So thank you for that, Tony.
Oh, you're very welcome. And if you've enjoyed it too, please do rate, review and subscribe. And you can find us at thedriverhirepodcast.com. And until next time, goodbye from me.
And goodbye for me.